Hello dear friends, and thank you for joining me today. Sari, who owns a fabulous craft store, Sarisstampingstudio, asked if I would create something with these new dies from Team Holtz and Sizzix. I will link to Oliver the Rabbit and Sari's Stamping Studio in the description box below. Now, this rabbit can be done many ways, and to make it easy, these dies are coded so you can know which shade of color to use. There is grey 1, grey 2, 3, 4 and 5, along with green and pink. And together with a picture on the packaging, you can easily figure out where they go and what color to use. A suggestion from me is to cut a few extra pieces if you lose a small piece, and put them in bowls for big pieces, the medium pieces and the small pieces, to avoid chasing the right piece or losing one. You can do this two ways. Cut out all the pieces from colored cardstock, like I'm doing here. Or you can do what I chose to do after trying the first way. I cut out all the pieces in white and color them myself. I don't have a lot of colored cardstock in so many shades, so this way was easier for me. You can color your pieces any way you like, but I chose to color my pieces with Distress Oxide Inks. The first of many rabbits are colored in brown shades: tea dye, vintage photo, walnut stain and ground espresso. And by looking at the example on the packaging, I can figure out which pieces are light brown and which pieces are dark brown. And I use a small blending brush to darken the edges with a shade darker than the piece I colored. The smallest pieces are the eyes, nose, eyebrows and the highlight on his forehead and ears. Here I color them in the same Distress Oxides, but after the first time I decided to color the smallest pieces with alcohol markers to save time and my mental health. Here I am putting my first Oliver the Rabbit together with tweezers and glue. These dies cut so many pieces and layers, so it's like putting together a puzzle. And for every Oliver I make, I learn something. At last, when I glue down the black in the eyes, the pink pieces for his nose, his teeth and the pink in his ears, I begin to see how the rabbit will look when finished. And isn't he adorable? My next Oliver is blue, and I use tumbled glass for the lighter pieces, salty ocean for the medium pieces, and for the darkest piece I start off with broken china, but didn't feel it was dark enough, so I quickly changed to peacock feathers. As I put this blue Oliver together, I have a more steady hand and know where the pieces go without problems. And if I lose a small piece, I have cut several extra pieces ready to take its place. I must admit that this Oliver, or Olivia, became an obsession of mine. I love his wonky look, and these layered dies are called colorized dies because of the color coding in gray. But of course gray 1, 2 and so on can be blue 1, 2, etc. At this point I colored the eyes and the pink nose and ears with markers. They are easy enough to lose without ink blending such small pieces. It's time for a pink rabbit, and I start with laying out my pieces, and then I start ink blending with spun sugar as my lightest shade, Kitsch Flamingo as my medium shade, and picked raspberries as the darkest shade of pink. Then I put my pink Oliver together, and at this point the pieces fall into place much faster and I can move on to the next rabbit. My next rabbit is a purple rabbit, and I use Distress Oxide Inks in shaded lilac, wilted violet and dusty concord, and I put the purple Oliver together, and now there is only one more rabbit, I promise. The last rabbit is a grey one, and then I move on to make some accessories for Oliver. I use a stamp set called Crazy Things, and I stamped some hats and ties and fussy cut them out. I drew a monocle to one of my bunnies, and I glue a piece of plastic behind it and cut off the excess. And to go with that theme, I also drew a cane. Here I have sketched some mushrooms, and I traced the pencil lines with a permanent black marker. I drew the flowers coming up next for another crafty project, but I didn't get the colors right, so I saved the flowers and the footage to use them here instead. This mandala-looking flower are colored with Distress Oxide Inks in Kitsch Flamingo, picked raspberries, salty ocean and seedless preserves. Next up is this flower with heart-shaped petals, and I use the same color combination. I dilute the ink with water and use less water where I want my shadows, and I do that on all the flowers. I often draw this next flower with tangled hearts hanging from a branch, and this flower is colored in pink shades, Kitsch Flamingo, picked raspberries and seedless preserves. I love this flower, but I must admit it is quite the challenge to fussy cut. Next up is a blue flower with circles, and I use ink in blue shades. My lightest blue is tumbled glass, and I use the darker shades salty ocean, broken china and faded jeans to give this flower some depth. Another classic flower of mine is this flower, and I color it with the same blue shades as before. I use the lighter blue at the base and the darker blue at the top of each petal. Now, let's color Oliver's accessories in Distress Oxide Inks, and I start with wilted violet and color the party hat and the circles on the tie. When I color the hats, I use a grey hickory smoke as a base and use black soot for the shadows, and I usually place my shadows coming in from the sides to make the object look round and not flat. For the straw hat, I used scattered straw and then mustard seed to darken the shadows. I use mustard seed on the party hat and the pink picked raspberries for the tie. The time has come for my mushrooms to get some color, and I use wilted violet at the top and the darker dusty concord for the base of each mushroom. For the stems, I used antique linen to give the stems a touch of color too. For this big project, I drew these round trees, and I colored them with the same blue shades as before: tumbled glass, salty ocean and peacock feathers. I drop in color and water with my brush and blend the blue shades together. I have now colored all my flowers and trees, and I can now move on to make some steampunk gears. I color my gears with metallic gelatos in copper, gold, silver and black. Gelatos are a creamy, water-based pigment stick, but you can achieve the metallic look in many other ways. I scribble on the gelatos and use my finger to drag the color out and blend them, and I use the black to give my gears that dirty, grungy look. Now let's make the background. I'm using washi tape to divide my art journal into 4 squares, and I use multi-matte medium first because I don't trust washi tape to stay put. I am going to use my Distress Oxide Sprays, and for the first rectangle I use weathered wood and copper. I spray with water first, spray my inks, and then water again to help them blend. For the next rectangle I use cracked pistachio and peacock feathers, and I do the same procedure and mop up excess ink with a wet wipe. Next up is picked raspberries and wilted violet, and for the last rectangle I use tumbled glass and picked raspberries again. To add some interest and texture, I pull out a panel left over that has been embossed with that embossing folder, and I cut the panel into pieces. To give the pieces a grungy vibe, I use archival black soot and swipe the ink pad over the pieces to help all those details to pop. Then I pull out Tim Holtz wood grain paper that I bought on second hand, and I ink that paper up with vintage photo, ground espresso and black soot before I cut that panel into pieces too. Now let's finish this background, and I start with the metal pieces and glue them down on my spread random, but I limit them to act as a kind of a frame around my rectangles. The first rectangle is the one that is going to have a steampunk vibe, but I let my pieces spill over to the other rectangles to add interest there too. Then I move on to the wood paper strips, and I glue them down in the corners on the other 3 rectangles. Next up are the gears, and I glue down most of them in my steampunk rectangle, but as I did before, I glue down a few in other rectangles too. It's time to give my bunnies their accessories, and I glue down a hat on my pink bunny, a tie for my purple bunny, then I give the brown bunny that straw hat. The grey bunny will live in my steampunk rectangle, so I give him the monokel, cane and the hat. Finally, I give my blue bunny the party hat and the bow tie, and I use 2 die-cut pieces to give the brown bunny something to stand on. It's now time to decorate the rectangles with my mushrooms and flowers. I place the mushrooms in my steampunk rectangle along with the flower, and then I glue down the flowers and trees all over the other rectangles. When all the decorations are in place, it's time for my bunnies to move into their homes. I put the grey bunny in the steampunk rectangle, and the brown bunny gets the rectangle across from the grey. The pink bunny gets to live in the lower left rectangle, and the blue and purple bunnies move into the lower right. And with that, my art journal spread with many different Olivers are finished. Thank you all so much for watching and commenting. It means the world to me, and I hope you'll visit me here soon again. Until the next time, see you soon.